legislation is. If somebody goes out on a limb, the others might follow. So to his credit, the ACT Attorney General wants to go first. So we'll be advising him before the end of the year on how he can amend ACT legislation to recognise transgender and intersex people. But I have to say as well, it's a real brain buster when you think through all the implications of whether and how to record or not people's gender identity and intersex status. Something to talk about later. Some questions. We've got one here and one in the middle.
Just quickly, I know from friends' experience, imprisonment's been an issue with the transgender and, by the sounds of it, the intersex gender issues. So being put in prison if you're a male that identifies as a female, for example, and you get put into a male prison, is that still an issue, or is that being resolved somewhat by legislation or any other movement?
Yeah, so the issue here is a broader one of the fact that society sees sex as either male or female and gender as either masculine or feminine. And because we have that binary function, we try and put people who don't fit into either box into one of them. So we're not sure where to put somebody who's in the process of transitioning into a men's jail or a woman's jail. And we've had some segue in most states about that. Perhaps more in the jail system versus the custody system of police stations, because it's often the individual in the police station not sure what to do. I think it's by and large better than it was in the 90s, but I think we need to have a further look at how we do that more productively, whether it be putting them into minimum security or more sensitive environments in a rougher area. It's very difficult to be able to find a blueprint that fits every situation.
Yes.
Just to contribute, I guess, to the development, and that is that in Tasmania, at the moment, transgender status sits under sexuality where it doesn't belong. It is going to be pulled out, and it is going to include, or the Act is going to specifically protect people on the basis of intersex as well, so separate to transgender. And my understanding is it's...
Let's see if we can have a race from federal to Tasmania to get in first, because it's going to be the first in the world.
I reckon it'll be us, but...
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead. You've got mine.
Got all the power. Corey, I just wanted to ask about some of the comments that you were making around exceptions, and particularly the distinction you make between organisations that receive public funds and those that don't, and maybe ask for your comments. I mean, obviously, organisations that don't receive public funds still have obligations under anti-discrimination laws. And I wonder whether it may not be necessary or what we might be asking for to exempt those, given that they don't get exceptions in any of the other areas generally, or limited areas, and perhaps maybe suggest that some test of proportionality could be a way to manage the conflict in a more consistent way. A test of proportionality.
Yeah.
So the issue of whether or not you receive public funds might be relevant to that test, but not determinative of the outcome.
Yeah. Look, my starting point is that I think the only people who should receive an exemption from Discrimination Acts are ministers of religion, clergy, and those directly involved in the act of a faith-based ceremony. Outside of that, in public life, providing any kind of service, my principal position would be they shouldn't. Whether it be a school, whether it be an adoption agency, whether it be a nursing home, whether it be a counselling service, whether it be a school's chaplain program. But I also respect that we need to have a dialogue as a community about the balancing between freedom of religion and the freedom of non-discrimination. And perhaps that dialogue will take us away from my ideal position. And so my next position is, well, the government has a very clear mandate to ensure that its services are delivered in a non-discriminatory fashion. It has a leadership role to set that principle in private sector or community sector that it's not funding, but it has a mandate to ensure that its government funds are not used in a discriminatory fashion. And so that's probably why I made that distinction as an option for dialogue. I like your idea of an inherent requirements test, in much the same way that we've used a genuine occupational test in the past for employment exemption perhaps. How it looks is something that I think we collectively need to start talking about and present a united front and engage in dialogue, because as it stands today, I think we're going to have some of the worst exemptions in Australia in this federal legislation if the side that's sitting in this room doesn't start speaking up and educating the Australian public. And I'll give you a prime example. Very, very, very quickly. Sanitarium is owned by the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Nobody would ever think that sanitarium is anything other than a business. They would never think that it should receive exemptions. If you can get everybody agreeing to that, then start bringing them back to ask, well, what else is a business versus a faith-based service delivery or linked to a faith-based organisation. We need to find bookends of this conversation and start bringing people back towards the middle to find the middle ground. And we're not bookending either side at the moment. We've only got the other side bookending their side.
We're going to go from there to ageing, which reminds me of my question to Dr. Petrova this morning, which is, yes, this is all one issue, human rights, but boy, it's so many different issues. So let's hear from Sue on ageing, the aged.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm actually here to talk about us and our future. Hopefully we're all going to grow old enough, and therefore if we want to have a good old age, then we better start working on it. A bit like Corey saying, we better start talking about it. Council on the Ageing is an NGO for, by and with older people. And unfortunately, the Age Discrimination Act and this space is probably the weakest of the lot, except I'm not sure now. Thank you, James. But the future can only get better. And this is about us and our future. And it's about ageism and age discrimination, which unfortunately is alive and well. Australia is, if you haven't noticed, is a very ageist country, community. Our attitudes have a long way to go, and I'm with Phillip in terms of saying, I want to come up with the rest of you, not drag you down to where we are. So the Federal Act is one of the poorest. There is no international treaty, but I am pleased to say that next week there is a discussion at the UN about should we or shouldn't we have something beyond what we have, which is the Madrid International Plan on Active Ageing, which goes nowhere to set the benchmark. It's informative and useful, but doesn't have the same status, or it doesn't help set the federal agenda and or state and territories. Ageing and ageism is very little understood by anyone, older or younger. Complaints by age are growing, but mainly follow the area that has become better understood, which is work. But the exemptions themselves probably contribute to ageism and age discrimination. I can employ a 75-year-old and would be encouraged to by our governments. They'll pay taxes like younger workers, but do not have access to super or to work cover, and I do not have to pay the 9% loading. So if you are a volunteer, depends where you're volunteering, either at 70, 75 or 80, because they vary, you're not covered under insurance. Older workers encouraged to work, but without the benefits. Is it due to the myth that we will retire and want to by then, but where is the choice? Why don't we care, and why aren't we committed to the rights of older people? Older people are peak in age, you know, anywhere between 45, if you read Commissioner Broderick's work on discrimination in the workforce, or 60 if you want to get a seniors card in this state and don't work 35 hours. 65 if you're male and you want to get the pension, and the dog's breakfast goes on. And they're more than just the baby boomers, which we hear about. And the stereotyping of groups by age, you know, whether it be Gen Y or Gen X, because age discrimination is not just about being old. However, that's, I guess, my focus at this point. But to say that no age discrimination should occur. But unfortunately, we do believe the myths and the stereotypes. Older people we are going to be and are becoming a significant part of the population. It'll be 25% of the